The Autoblog Podcast is presented by the Salvation Army. Your donations help those in need win their daily battles to survive poverty. To give, ask your smart speaker to make a donation to the Salvation Army, or make your gift at salvationarmyusa.org.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today in the studio on a brisk Friday morning, assistant editor and fleet manager Zachary Palmer.
Hey, glad to be here.
It's chilly, right?
It's very cold outside, yes.
It was 28 degrees this morning when I let the dog out, and it was actually not even that early. It was like 7. At that point, you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I had to scrape the ice off the car this morning.
Good times.
Yeah, first time I had to do that this year.
And where it's always cold out in Colorado, Chris McGraw, senior producer.
Hey guys, how's it going? Man,
we're cold.
We got hit with the snow last week. I got an STI S209 in the parking lot on summer tires, and a forecast for this weekend that's supposed to be 70 and sunny. So I think I got you beat out here with the weather.
Seriously, 70 and sunny?
Yep.
That is crazy.
That's a wild weather swap.
That
I don't
is
know how
the
you
most,
go from snow to that.
Yeah, it was literally 0 degrees like a week ago.
Wow. I mean, it could still be 70 here in Michigan, actually. Like, not likely, but this is a little extreme even for us. But that's usually how it goes. All right, so this is going to be a really good show. It's going to be a really simple show. The Toyota Supra arrived in our fleet this week. Zach, you were super lucky. I was out sick for part of the week, and almost everybody else was on vacation or traveling or covering an auto show. So you got to drive a Supra like your personal car for a couple days.
I did, yeah.
That's awesome. And then the other thing we're going to hit on is McGraw. This is probably just as cool for some people, maybe even more so. You got to drive a bunch of Land Cruisers, which I can't wait to hear about. I don't get on a lot of press trips these days, but this was literally the one. I was like, I might want to try and jump in on this one. But that's what we'll do. Then we're going to spend some money. So 3 awesome things. Supra, Land Cruiser, spending money. Let's go. Supra.
All right. This is one of my most anticipated cars to drive. It's been for a long while.
Yeah.
I think for pretty much everyone. When it arrived at our offices, this was actually the first one that I saw in the flesh on the streets in public. I'd only seen them on the auto show floor before, and it looks so good. It is slick. If you've seen the BMW Z4 and you've seen the Supra, both in person, I think the Supra wins hands down there. But obviously, I drove it for 2 nights, so I'm going to tell you a little bit what I think about it. Overall impressions, just from a very overhead look, I love this thing. I really, really like driving the Supra. It feels like a sports car through and through, but it's also a sports car that I feel I could drive on a daily basis. It's not, super hardcore, something that you need to have a second car for, like the GT350 or a higher horsepower Camaro. This feels like a car that I could actually hop into and drive and be happy with the power, the handling, the ride, all of that stuff on a daily basis. I think that Toyota, they did such a fantastic job actually dialing this car in to make it like that, a wonderful compromise between being like a great street car and an awesome car to take on back roads and maybe even the track. At the same time, I think it is super important to point out that it drives somewhat like a BMW because it uses a whole lot of BMW parts. And I'll blame the wonderful engine and transmission for a lot of that. I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing, but you do have basically the same exact engine that is in the BMW Z4 with that turbocharged inline 6. It's obviously rated for a little less horsepower, 335 horsepower, 365 pound-feet of torque, but it feels just like that. Super powerful, feels stronger than what it's actually rated at. This thing is a rocket ship off the line. It picks up right away. You get full boost really low in the RPM range, and it just pulls and pulls all the way to 7,000 RPM. I really cannot stress like how fun it actually is to accelerate in this car. We've been having some cold mornings around here for sure. This one had summer tires on it. So, when the temperature, like I was driving around like 30-degree weather, which you're not necessarily supposed to do with summer tires on it, but it just squirms around underneath you, eventually hooks up and then rocketed away, even with those summer tires on it. The traction control tuning, I think, is fantastic. It lets you have a little bit of fun, even with traction control completely on. You can spin the tires up, get a little bit sideways, and then if you turn traction control off, then really get you some more slip angle, and then you can actually turn stability you can get stability control completely off, and the car is yours to do with as you please at that point. And it's super controllable, super fun. It's a short wheelbase car, so it's super playful. But yeah, no, the power, the way it delivers the power. It may be a BMW engine, but it's awesome. There's no reason to knock it for that. And then the transmission, I think, is a huge sticking point for a lot of people. The fact that it doesn't have a manual transmission. But there's
Wait, is that controversial? I didn't know that.
Just a little,
just a little
controversial. Yeah.
Please chime in on the comments.
So yeah, please. I'm sure that everybody thinks it should have a manual. I think it should also have a manual. The ZF8 Speed is fantastic. I think it's one of the best applications of that transmission. It's super fast, manual mode, super enjoyable to use. It's honestly one of the quickest reaction times from just a normal torque converter automatic that I've ever experienced. And I found myself actually using manual mode a lot with it, which I don't do that often, even with cars with great automatic transmissions like that, just because I find that the actual transmission tuning is just fine, and you don't necessarily need to do that. But this car, I did. It's that quick and that fun to use. And sport mode is the next thing that I will get to, because that leads right into why I was using the manual mode so much. When you switch it into sport mode, a whole lot of things change, but one of the biggest things you notice is the sound. It goes from being this somewhat mellow, easy, quieter, still a really nice inline six purr and sound, but it just ramps up the aggressiveness like almost tenfold, maybe a little bit less.
That's impressive. A lot of times you'll get cars, you just don't even notice it, and you think it's like way oversold. So that's interesting. Yeah, no. So it in normal mode, there's no pops or bangs from the exhaust, but then as soon as you flip it into sport mode, the idle feels louder. The actual tone of the exhaust in the engine feels deeper. And on every single overrun, you get, between 5 to 10 pops and bangs from the exhaust. And, I just found myself, downshifting as I came to every single light, just 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd, just to hear the pop, 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 pop. Maybe those pops are not, they're not bringing you faster anywhere, that they're not actually, mechanically getting you anything, but it's something that people like us love. And I think it sounds fantastic. It makes it much more fun to drive around in sport mode that way. And then sport mode does a few other things also. Stiffens up the suspension to a certain amount that it feels stiff, and it certainly improves the handling and the feel of the car when you're really going for it on a back road. But it also it's not too stiff that I just would turn it off when I was going back and forth from work. It was something that, if I was on a really bad road with horrible frost heaves or huge potholes, I'd be like, maybe I'm going to turn this off. But just driving around the surface streets, I was totally fine to compromise a little bit of the ride for the better steering, the better throttle response, and the sound as well. It was huge. It sounds like it really ticked all the boxes as far as the driving experience, the sound. How about the looks?
So, yes, I have not gotten to the looks, and the interior is honestly where I think I have the most problems with this car. The actual looks of it. The functionality of the interior is great, but you feel like you're sitting in a BMW. Every single control is ripped exactly from BMW's part bin. The same texture, feel of the buttons, the infotainment control knob, the heads-up display, the infotainment system. You almost kind of forget that you're in this, a Toyota Supra, which is this Japanese car legend. And I think that it does take away from the experience a little bit, because you feel like you're in something German. There's no doubt about it. But back to what I said about the actual functionality of the interior and how it works, I think it's great for a sports car. I think the position, the driving position, you're sitting super down low. You're looking out of this somewhat narrow windshield over top of a long roof. A long hood. And you're just kind of cocooned in here, and it's hugely beneficial on a back road. You end up feeling super connected to the car because you feel like you're sitting so down low in the chassis, and the whole car just kind of like envelopes around you, and it's a awesome feeling that you don't get in some of the competition. Like when I sit in a Mustang GT350, I feel like I'm sort of sitting on top of the car to a certain degree instead of actually like down low in the car, in this almost cockpit like position that the Supra gives you. And I think that's something that you'll notice as soon as you get in the car. One thing that does suffer with that is just total visibility. Your blind spots, there are huge pillars back there, and they do get in the way. But I think it's not the worst thing in the world, because you do get that awesome exterior styling. Like you asked what I think of the styling. I think it looks so good on the road. I felt like a rock star driving the thing. You constantly get people looking at you. Like I said, I have not seen any of these on the road before. This was literally the first one that I saw driving around, showed up in the parking lot. The double bubble roof, the little like ducktail spoiler, the curve of the hood. It looks so much like the FT1 concept that we saw at the auto show back in like 2014 or something.
Yeah, 14.
Yeah, yep. I was obsessed with that car then. I was like, Toyota needs to make this. I wasn't necessarily thinking it would result in the Supra. I was thinking maybe they could do some other sports car and maybe not call it the Supra. But I mean, the fact that design actually translated to something that is production, I think, is spectacular. And we should be super thankful that a car like this exists and looks this fantastic.
That's bad. You had a great couple days in this. I actually this morning I peeked over the office here. I was like, hey, the key's still here. I was thinking it might have maybe gone back on Friday. A little disappointed. I was thinking about maybe jetting up and down Woodward in it right before the podcast, but super jealous. Good review
super
there.
Jealous.
Yeah, super jealous. I see.
Yeah, thank you for not replacing every time you said super with Supra. That was, yeah.
Well, I mean, what if that'd be a great way to trick the SEO universe, is just put a transcript and change super to Supra. Maybe we should just do that. I don't know. Okay. Anyways, yeah. So I think what strikes me is how I would say you're sort of like, your review here of it really comes down in the way we sort of thought this would shake out. BMW pieces are a little bit, not offensive, but like you notice them to people who are car people and people who, really respect what the Supra is and was and has been. And it doesn't have a manual. So, I mean, that basically is like, car's awesome, but BMW influence in no manual. And like literally when we saw this thing at the Detroit Auto Show in January, people were like freaking out over those two elements. So I don't know. It's interesting. That's kind of where it ended up grading out a little bit. Awesome car though.
It really is a fantastic car. I think, the execution, Toyota said that they basically took the parts from BMW and did all the tuning and everything themselves. the car still feels a lot like a BMW. Maybe, Toyota's solution with the tuning is a lot what BMW does with a lot of their performance cars. But the only like real difference that you notice between driving this and driving like an M2 or any sort of sporty BMW is that this is lower to the ground. You sit lower. Everything just feels a bit more immediate and in your face, and that's the way a sports car should feel.
Yeah, I for one, this was to go back to the Detroit show controversy. Our editors basically split on this. Like senior editor Alex Kirstein was had some pretty hot opinions on how this isn't great for the Supra, and I know James Riswick, our West Coast editor, was like, how is having all these BMW parts a bad thing? These guys make amazing cars. And I think that was actually the camp I started to fall in. I remember Jeremy Korsnewski had a lot of strong opinions. I think he was more on the Kirstein side. And the way I fall is basically this is a good thing. These are some of the best, most sophisticated engineers in the world. I don't see as much. Well, I do see what the big deal is, but it doesn't disturb me as much. Again, I didn't drive it. You did. And I think your observations are so spot on there that, you get in the car and you're like, oh, wow, am I in the Z4? So, and we had a Z4 M40, I believe, M40i.
We actually had the 4-cylinder.
The 4-cylinder,
okay. It was a 30i. So
Gotcha.
This feels significantly faster, has
I would think.
much stiffer suspension, feels much more like a sports car than that one did.
I like driving that thing. I enjoyed, what I liked about the Z4 is we didn't obsess over it like we did with this. We were just like, oh, it's the new Z4, but also it feels like a BMW. The fact that the Supra feels like a BMW, sort of, brings in that controversial element. So
it does. Yeah. I mean, the one hang up that I've always had with this car from the start, I just wish that Toyota would develop their own car. I mean, they have the capability of making something so fantastic. If you remember the Lexus LFA, that thing is just an absolute rocket and a beast, and something that pretty much every enthusiast holds in such high esteem these days. Obviously there's nothing wrong with the BRZ or 86, but that was also a joint development with Subaru. And now this one, I mean, this is also a joint development with BMW, a little more BMW in it than there was Subaru in the 86. But I just feel like Toyota definitely could have put, more of a spin on it that we expect from a Japanese automaker than what, we get from BMW and a German car.
You know what I think is interesting is these different sports car alliances we're seeing these days. The Fiat 124 and the Mazda, Miata. That was slightly, less controversial than this, but I think it also was less controversial because the Fiat was essentially a new addition, or at least a recent new addition for Fiat's product portfolio in the U.S., whereas people, I think, were less upset about it having some very strong Mazda influences because it got its own engine. It looks like a Fiat. And frankly, people don't care as much about the 124. If it had been the other way around, where Mazda essentially badge engineered a, Fiat product, I think we would have heard all kinds of controversy. But I think this is just the way sort of, car companies are trying to scale their sports car, offerings these days. Any final thoughts on what I can only imagine was a very good middle of the week for you?
I think that if you're looking for a sports car that looks fantastic and you could actually drive to work and back every single day if you wanted to, I think you need to go drive a Supra. I mean, put your feelings aside about this is it's all BMW hardware. It's got a BMW engine. It's not a Toyota. Just set the feelings aside for a second. Go drive the car, and if you still come away with it feeling like, oh my God, this is hearsay, this isn't a Toyota, then fine. But I have a feeling that most people are going to come away very impressed by what this car is, how it looks, how it behaves on the road, and how it drives. Like it's a fantastic car.
And that is the one part of this I'm a little surprised about, is that Toyota was sort of willing to like have some of that BMW stuff come through in something that is so niche and so enthusiast oriented. Like if there's any product people are going to notice the BMW pieces on, it's the Supra.
Yep.
You know, if they joint developed a midsize crossover and had a BMW dashboard, people would love that. They'd be like, sweet, this is
Totally.
great. So that's, I guess, a little bit of a surprise for me, but well said. Again, next time one comes in, I will be driving it. That's for sure. Let's move on. McGraw, you had an interesting adventure in Land Cruisers, past and present. This was, I believe, a couple weeks ago now. Why don't you start off? Where did you go and what did you do? Tell us about the premise of this.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, I'm out here in Colorado, just outside of Denver, and actually this trip just took me one state over to Salt Lake City, where Toyota was having us drive their 2020 Heritage Edition, which we saw at the Chicago Auto Show. But the reason we were in Salt Lake City is that the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum is there. And if you are a lover of off-roading or SUVs or Toyota or just vehicles in general, you should definitely go to this museum. We had our dinner there the first night, and there are very few Land Cruisers they don't have at that museum. They just have everything you could imagine under the sun, from, FJ40s to 60s, 70s series that have literally driven on all 7 continents, which I believe, according to what I was hearing at the museum, there's only one vehicle that has driven on all 7 continents, and it was a 70 series Land Cruiser that was at that museum. And so it was kind of like this, the Heritage Edition is celebrating the 60 years that the Land Cruiser has been driving around this planet, and the Heritage Museum was a good way to like check out all 60 years of that history, which is pretty cool. And then
sounds very interesting. That museum, I think, is also worth being on a bucket list. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. And it's owned actually by the same guy who the Miller family that used to own Miller Motorsports Park out in Utah, and has a bunch of Ford GT500s, GT40s, all that stuff. So they're like, they know how to do museums right when it comes to cars, and this one was definitely up there for me. So I was raised in Detroit. My family, it was like, if you drive anything other than a big 3, we're going to disown you, sort of a thing. It's not going to be parked in my driveway. So I think it kind of came as a surprise to my family and maybe a little bit to myself when I moved out here and became like such a Land Cruiser nut. Like I love Land Cruisers. I've gotten the chance to ride in them a few different places outside of the States. So like 70 series that we can't get here. And lately, as if you listen to the podcast, you've heard spend my money where I'm in the market for a 100 series. And so the next day we left the hotel and went to this off-road park called 5 Mile Park, and just like a bunch of trails. And they had 7 different kinds of Land Cruiser for us to drive there, which was just seeing all of them together was great. And then knowing that I'd get to be, behind the wheel of each one of these was even better. So let me just do a quick rundown of the 7 that we had there. So there was a 2020 Heritage Edition, obviously, because that's what we got flown out to drive. There was a regular 200 series, like a 2019 model. There was a 2004 100 series, a 1991 80 series, an 84 FJ60, a 77 FJ55, which is also known as the Iron Pig, which if you bring up any photos of it, you will understand why, and a 77 FJ40, which was the one I was most excited about. So they were all just sitting there and the mountains are in the background, and they're like, yeah, just hop in and take a quick lap.
That's awesome. So I'm curious, first of all, like these things are really like tough vehicles. Was the terrain, and obviously they wanted you to test these things, but were you at all nervous? Like, oh geez, I'm going to break one of these iconic vehicles on like hitting a tree or something.
Right.
I don't know.
They were like museum examples. So the thought did cross my mind the night before. So I actually drove the 200 series there, and then I hopped in the Heritage Edition right away to do the off-road course in those two. And that way I could kind of ease myself into the older ones. And so the trail that they had us on, we didn't have any spotters or anything. I've done a fair bit of off-roading. This wasn't my first time, but my driving partner, I think it was one of the first times he had done some off-roading. It was not difficult at all, especially in the 200 series. The Heritage Edition doesn't have the running boards that the regular 200 series has. So the ground clearance was more than enough for the stuff that we were doing. And the 2019 200 series, the running board scraped a little bit, but it wasn't anything where I thought I was going to, get stuck or needed a spotter for anything like that. And so after getting done with that climb, I was like, okay, I'm going to hop in this 100 series. And then they kind of had them all lined up in a separate area. And the the off-road trail, I'm going to put those in air quotes. I've driven on driveways that were like a little more rough than that off-road trail, which I totally understand. These are museum vehicles. Some of them like hadn't even been run in years until they had brought them out there. And they don't want us, like you said, Greg, they don't want us running them into trees or anything. Wide open terrain, not a ton of rocks. So after I went through with the 100 series, which I've driven plenty of out here, and it's just as easy to drive as the 200 series. I was not nervous about driving the rest of them at all.
What I think is that's the same approach I would have done, is take like the most capable modern, vehicle that you can handle, and whatever, they can fix it. They have, these things called factories, and then go out there with the museum pieces. So I'm curious about like the Heritage Edition too. This thing really blew up on our site when it was revealed at the Chicago Auto Show back in February. Like, you guys couldn't get enough of it. Everybody, like, this clicked so well. I couldn't believe it, considering essentially it's not that big of a deal. It's like there's some paint colors, some trim, some badges. It looks cool. I would love one, but I was surprised how well, it trafficked, if you will, and how much people got into it. So what do you think, McGraw? Do people is this worth it because it costs a bit more? Does it look that much different? Are you better off just, buying like a used, like lightly used, late model Land Cruiser? I don't know. How does this thing shake out?
So for me, driving wise, if you've driven a 200 series before, you've driven a Heritage Edition. It doesn't have anything crazy on it that makes it go, oh man, this is, so much better than my 2019 200 series. So whether or not it's worth it, so to me, that's kind of like a two-part question. The first being, this thing costs nearly $90,000. So that's a lot. But the Heritage Edition package itself is not a ton of money over the regular one. So it's like if you were gonna buy a Land Cruiser anyways, you're gonna drop $86,000 on a car anyways. I think the Heritage Edition is worth it to bump up that extra $2,000 to $3,000 to get the stuff that's on it. Which you have the badging on the back that looks really great. The wheels, which are something that I've spent that money, like the difference between a regular and a Heritage. I've spent that money on new wheels in general. And those wheels are really, really gorgeous. They're bronze. They got the Toyota script right in the middle. And it also comes with the Yakima roof rack, which I think on its own costs about $500. And then also on the inside, if you need the third row, this isn't the one for you because it has a third row delete. I myself will never need a third row in a Land Cruiser. So I'm like, all these things that it kind of comes with make up, to me, for the price between the normal 200 series and the Heritage Edition 200 series. But when you are talking overall, is the Land Cruiser worth $90,000 to me? No, it's not. I would totally go used. Like if there is any vehicle on the market that you should buy used over the new one, it is probably a Land Cruiser. That thing is going to last forever. And so if you get something with 100,000 miles on it, you're barely broken in at that point. So the new one, 90 grand, oof, that's a lot. But in like 15 to 20 years, if I see a Heritage Edition on Craigslist, I'm going to be looking to snatch that one up. So yeah, I think the package is worth it. The overall price of the Land Cruiser is a hard pill for me to swallow in general.
That's, I think, where I would fall to. As cool as this thing is, I would put this as like sort of in the press car bucket. Like, wow, I'd love it if somebody gave me the keys for free and asked me to like tell the world what I think about it. Sure. But would I want to put my hard-earned money into something like this? I mean, probably not. It would have to be like a situation where, I don't know, like it's one of those things where maybe like, I don't know, you have money to burn, or you love Land Cruisers that much and you're going to buy one anyway. And, in your spare time, you like play for the, San Francisco 49ers or something. It just, to me, this is almost like one of those things where it's not that expensive, like on the spectrum of just cars, but when you're talking about how expensive it is in relation to like what they're actually giving you, you're like, okay. But I would say it's brilliant marketing. It's like, It's sort of like the third jersey in sports, like there's home, away, and then there's like the third jersey. And a lot of times they're ugly as hell. Sometimes they're awesome, but it's like they're different. So people suddenly start spending money to buy them. And that's kind of what these things are, I think.
Yeah. And for that money, you could probably get most of the other vintage Land Cruisers that I drove like all together for that amount of money.
Yeah.
Too. So it's quite a bit by comparison, the 100 series that I drove, which was the 2004, that's a year that I've been looking for out here. And you can pick them up between 15 and 20. Now that's a 15-year-old car. But for 20 grand, you can get a 2004 100 series Land Cruiser that has really low miles and just do most of what the Heritage Edition can do. And you're spending, less than 25% of it. But yeah.
Do tell me which of the like historic models that you drove stood out the most. You had some late 70s. I mean, all of those made me super jealous. So which of those stood out the most?
Let me just do a quick run through of them all, because I think they're all worth talking about. The 100 series I'll probably spend the least amount of time on, since it's the most recent. The 100 series drove like a fairly modern SUV, had an automatic, wasn't anything super exciting about that Land Cruiser. The the 9180 series, that one was the first, that was like one of the first ones I hopped in to go on the off-road trail. The rest I drove on the road. And as soon as I got in, Alex Kirstein has a 1997 Toyota Tacoma that I've driven from Seattle to Banff with him. And as soon as I got in this 9180 series, it just immediately reminded me of his Tacoma. Like the seats felt the same. The interior was like this brown, like it was like comfortable but old, but it was still in really good condition. And even the smell of that Land Cruiser smelled like the inside of Kirstein's truck. It's like Toyota has a bottled.
Sure, he didn't drive this thing like before you or something.
Right, yeah. It's like Toyota has like 1990s truck bottled smell, and they just like put it in each of their.
That's kind of cool, actually, though.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. That one was also an automatic. It was a 4-speed, much lower horsepower, only 155, and but that one was super easy to drive, very comfortable. It made me actually think maybe I should be looking for 80 series too, but. Yeah, and the interior of that specific truck which you'll be able to check out in photos and a video next week on our site. It was pristine. I was amazed. This is a truck that's almost 30 years old, and it was just like rolled off the lot. Like that's the condition it was in. Yeah, so that was one of my favorites. The other two that were my favorite, I am not a fan of the look of the Iron Pig, the FJ55. It does not look great. The color schemes are really cool. They're like two-tone, seeing them like blue and white, and this one was green and white. But
100% with you. I just Googled that because I know what that is, but I had forgotten. But no thank you. Especially because there's so many other cool, like, Land Cruisers. But sorry to interrupt. Go on.
No worries. I think, hands down, this is the worst looking Land Cruiser. Like, I think it's probably not much of an argument there. But it drove really well. This was the first manual that I got in of the day. And I was kind of expecting, this is a 1977, I was kind of expecting it to be a bit worn and, the clutch to be a bit tough. But it wasn't. It was super easy to drive. It had like a fairly good amount of pickup for something that has that engine, which is the same engine in the 60 and the 40. It is a 4.2 liter inline six that it only makes 135 horsepower, so we're not talking a ton. 210 pound-feet of torque, but we were up like a mile into the mountains, so I was a little nervous about that 135 horsepower because it's probably realistically at that elevation and at that age less than 100 horsepower. But it didn't feel like it. It felt, I wouldn't go so far to say peppy, but it felt good. And having the manual transmission, obviously, you can do more with a smaller engine like that. The rear window of that one wouldn't close all the way, so there was like a 3 or 4 inch gap, and so the entire time we were driving, it was just like exhaust city inside the cabin. But it had a bench seat, and it had been a while since I had sat in a front seat that was a bench, so that was kind of cool too. And then after that, I hopped in the 84 FJ60, which is one of my favorite looking Land Cruisers. This one was a really good blue color, and everything that I was worried about with the FJ55, the clutch, the loose steering, not having enough power, while it wasn't true in the FJ55, in the FJ60, all of it was an issue. It had been driven in its lifetime. And at this point, we were at Snowbird Ski Resort, and we're trying to drive uphill on a road, not off-road. And it was just like pedal to the floor, just sit and wait. That thing was so slow, and the steering was so loose, and the clutch was just so vague. And it really bummed me out because looking at it, it was one of the best looking ones there, and then you get in it and it's like, this isn't great.
That's what actually stops me for buying an old Land Cruiser, aside from the fact that I don't need it and it's not really the ideal thing for a toddler, is that I'd drive it and I'd be so disappointed in some of the dynamics,
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I totally get you. You're talking about an engine that's been around since like the 60s. So it's like, man, this is a 1984 vehicle with like a 25-year-old engine. It's just nuts.
What's interesting too is when you talk about some of those like 70s, 80s SUVs, like even just looking at a picture of the Iron Pig, it made me think of like, the Jeep Grand Wagoneer.
Yeah.
Some of those vehicles that look even older than they actually are. And they're like 35 years old. 40 years, something like that. And then you look at it, you're like, wow, that thing looks like it's straight out of like the early 60s, or the Iron Pig looks like it's like out of the 50s, I mean, it's just, I find it very interesting how SUV design didn't really evolve for like decades, even now. But yeah.
They almost, they sold that Iron Pig up until 79, which is just crazy to think about that. It was almost, I mean, so that means there were brand new ones on the road in the 80s, and they looked like like that. But yeah, I'm totally with you. The last one I drove was also, I was kind of like saving this one for last. was the 77 FJ40, which is my favorite of the ones that were there. That one was made from 60 to 83. So that's crazy that the FJ40 was produced well into the 80s. Same inline six as the others, same horsepower, 135, 210 pound-feet. But because the curb weight is so much lower, it's a much smaller SUV than the other two. That one actually felt pretty peppy riding up and down those mountain roads. I mean, I'm not going to win any races in an FJ40, but it felt a lot quicker, especially after getting out of some of the other ones that had that same engine.
Nice. Well, that sounds like an epic trip. When I think of this vehicle, I think of like flannel and waxed barber jackets and just, that whole like different types of retrievers jumping in and out of the back of them. So yeah, super jealous you got to do that. Zach, I know you've got a little bit of a connection to Land Cruisers though, real quick. You didn't get to go on the trip, but I don't know. Land Cruiser thought.
I'm most jealous of that FJ40 that you got to drive. I think that is my favorite looking of all of them, and it's the one that you see people restore the most often. You see them out on the Woodward Dream Cruise. If I was looking to buy like a classic old SUV, that would be high on my list. Probably, I think I'd place it a little bit above a Bronco, honestly.
Wow,
around the same heritage. I just really, really dig the way that thing looks. 2 doors. Just something about like an old Japanese off-roader sounds really, really cool to me. So yeah, super, super jealous, Chris.
I love the back seats of that vehicle, how they face each other. And so like when I wasn't driving it, I just hopped in the bed, I guess the back of the trunk there, and just sat in the back. And I was having a blast with the FJ40 for sure.
Alrighty, let's leave it there and let's move on to spend my money. We've got a little bit of time left for that. Let's dig into this one. Okay, let me just pull it up here. All right, so the writer says a car accident, no one was hurt, finds him in need of a new car. The background: his girlfriend borrowed his car, an '09 Ford Fusion with a manual, and then got into an accident. So the wants and the needs: space. His girlfriend has 2 young children with booster seats, so commuting can be more crowded. Trust me, I know what it's like to have a car seat behind you. I'd like something newer than '09 and something with fewer miles than a Fusion, or the Fusion had, which was 112. So got some miles on that one. Deal breakers: manual transmission and a small crossover. Considering minivans, the Ford Flex, and an SUV with a 3rd row. So pretty nebulous on that third part. Budget's not totally set yet, but insurance is offering about $5,000. So basically that's some pretty good seed money. It would be tough to probably get something later than 2010 or 2009, as he says, for $5,000, but that's a pretty good head start. So, McGraw, let's start with you.
Yeah, I have a feeling that I know this person in real life. So
more to come on that.
Right. So knowing said person, I had a couple ideas, and one he already wrote down, and that is the Ford Flex. I know I get a bunch of crap from people for loving the Ford Flex as much as I do, and now that I live out here, I wouldn't buy one for myself, but considering that I believe this person lives in Michigan and doesn't off-road, I think the Flex has a lot of space. And if you get, it's going to cost more than $5,000, but it sounds like that's just the starting point. If you get the EcoBoost all-wheel drive Ford Flex, you can get a vehicle that is fairly fun to drive too. I think the 0 to 60 is within 0.1 or 0.2 of the old V6 Mustang. So it's fairly quick vehicle. And
That's a really great, like, I just got to jump in there. That's a great, like, I would say false equivalency there. Like, you're comparing that V6, which was kind of a dog, to the Flex, which has surprisingly good power. Great comparison. You should get into politics. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're also talking about a vehicle that weighs a lot more than the Mustang, too.
Right.
And with the all-wheel drive, that'd be good in Michigan. And if you get the bucket seats in the back, it's really easy to access the third row. And I think the third row is fairly comfortable too. And so if you have kids in booster seats, one can easily get in the back, or you could just keep them in the bucket seats. I don't have kids or have dealt with a booster seat, this millennia, so I'm not really sure about that. But yeah, I think I would go Ford Flex. My other idea was totally out of nowhere. I think he should look for a last gen F-150, which isn't even on the list of things that he's looking for, but I think he could get one in the years that he's talking about. And the interior of a crew cab F-150 is monstrous. I think people forget about how big the interior is of that truck and full-size pickups in general. There's a ton of legroom. You could stick those booster seats in the back, and there'd still be plenty of room. Plus, you have the utility of a truck bed. So,
very creative there. A lot of different options for this gentleman who will remain nameless for now. Zach, let's move on to you.
All right. I have one suggestion, and I'm quite confident that it is absolutely the car that you need. You need to buy a Mazda 5. You need to buy, I think that is hits every single category that you want. You can even get one, a nice one, with decent miles on it for around $5,000 or even under $5,000. They obviously stopped making that car a few years ago, but you can get one 2009 or after for around that price. And this is about as much utility as you can pretty much get for that amount of money. You got 3 rows. The second row are captain's chairs, so super easy to load big children's seats in and out of there, hopefully. The third row is somewhat spacious, actually. You can even put adults back there, and they'll be totally fine. And then you can actually take all those seats out and just put a ridiculous amount of stuff in it. I actually moved back and forth from college in a Mazda 5, and it is pretty much future-proof. The thing will last for as long as you'd like. My parents have had 2 Mazda 5s now. The thing is, it's an awesome little thing. It handles well, weirdly, because it's a Mazda, and they really care about that. The only thing I think the Flex has on it is that powertrain. The Mazda 5 is not fast by any means at all. It has a little 2.3 liter 4-cylinder, but it's one of the compromises you can make and get even better fuel economy too.
Well said. The Flex popped to my mind as well. I can't believe how much the Flex comes up in conversations with randomly dads in my age group, guys who need an SUV. Maybe they don't want an SUV. They don't want a minivan. And it's just like I have this really good friend who's like, yeah, I think I'd get in the Flex. And I'm like, what? But I remember I actually spontaneously did a daily driver. Remember when we did those, McGraw?
Yeah. Yep.
Video. I hooked up a bunch of GoPros just because I was so taken with the Flex. This is a few years back. So I think the Flex is a strong play. Still drives pretty well, looks different. You're not going to stand out around here in Michigan, let's put it that way, because there's a million of them, but they're still pretty cool looking, I think. Yeah, so I think that would be one way I'd be leaning. Mazda's certainly a great option as well. Zach, I hadn't even thought of that. That's cool. A couple other things you might want to look at. The trick is, I think we could use a little more information from the writer, which should be easy to get, which we'll tell you in a second. I think he used late model, maybe a Ford Explorer. You could get those for under 20. One point of clarity is is the $5,000 seed money, or is that the whole budget? used Outback or used Forester, I think those are solid. Not going to come cheap, but they're available, especially if you're willing to do some financing. Here's actually a totally random one. 82,000 mile 2013 Range Rover Sport HSE for 20 grand. I don't know. That's super random.
Knowing this person, I think he'd be totally interested in that one.
Yeah. If I recall, this person was looking at Range Rovers at one point when we were like during a previous car search for him or something. You could get some decent used Volvos for, all of these are under 20. Let's put it that way. And then I know this is not what he's going for, but you can still get like an XJ Cherokee or an old 4Runner for about 5. So now when I put toddlers in those things, I would probably not do that. I think you want to, for a toddler with a car seat, you want to find something that's newer and safer, which is actually the whole reason I haven't bought that Land Cruiser that's at the end of my subdivision. So I would look at the Flex or, depending on the money, I would consider maybe, a late model used SUV like an Outback or a Forester or something like that. The writer is our video manager of video production. Really butchered that title. Edward Sabatini. So thanks for writing. Thanks for emailing. Thanks for running video. And we'll try and get some more answers just because, if you work for a car website, you should get some good detailed guidance. And we will leave it there. This is a fun show. We'll keep it tight this week, just under an hour. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the Autoblog Podcast, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We're also available on Spotify, YouTube, and basically anywhere that has video or sound. It was fun talking cars with you guys this week. Be safe out there. We'll see you next week.